Well, folks, it's time for the next in-depth look at an older anime series, and, as dictated by the poll, this next examination will be of Madhouse's 1998 semi-western classic, Trigun. Now, Trigun is a relatively well-known series, especially one from the late 90s, but it seemed just obscure enough to me to warrant talking about on this channel. And it was, after all, chosen by the poll. I'd like to preface this review with the statement that I know that Trigun is not the most obscure anime. In fact, I barely considered it obscure enough to review here. But I do faintly remember it growing up, and as many viewers of anime might actually be younger than I am now, I think that Trigun does deserve to be looked at in this day and age. I hope I don't repeat anyone too much, anyone who's also reviewed this series, but I simply want to take my own look at it and see why it's such a gem of its time, and why it should be remembered, even today. In fact, it is actually getting a prequel, so the timing of this review was actually pretty nifty. I would also like to preface this by saying that I understand that Trigun is a classic, and it's revered by many, including myself. I don't mean to criticize it unduly, although there are a few points of contention which I may bring up from time to time, mostly just having to do with the pacing and how it distinguishes itself from the manga in that it's shorter and doesn't necessarily explain everything as well. These flaws are of course very common with 90s adaptations, and are not something that damns the series. In fact, the series stands alone on its own very well, and I would like to say that although I do intend on pointing out some, objective flaws of the series, mostly to do with this discrepancy with the manga as mentioned earlier, I do think the series as a whole is a masterpiece, and one that should be treasured, and one I'd like to examine, and one which I very much enjoyed. And while it has been spoken of by many before, I hope I can lend something informative with my own look at the series. So, where do we start? Well, we start with the plot examination, but before I get any further into this, I would like to note that the Trigun manga and the Trigun anime actually follow slightly different plots with slightly different character backstories, some additional characters, and different endings. However, for the most part, we'll just focus on the anime, how it stands on its own, although I will reference the manga from time to time, just, so you know. Now, the original Trigun anime is 26 episodes long, and tells of the adventures of Vash the Stampede, aka the Humanoid Typhoon, and a few of his companions, those being Meryl Streep, Lily Thompson, and Nicholas D. Wolfwood. The story takes place on the planet Gunsmoke, a lost human colony where people are still getting by and seem to be living in settings akin to the American Wild West. As episode 1 starts, we can hear conversations which set up the reputation of Vash the Stampede, an alleged merciless killer and legendary criminal with a bounty of $60 billion on his head for acts of massive destruction and harm, destroying entire cities. For this reason, Meryl Streep and Lily Thompson are dispatched by the Bernadelli Insurance Society to track down and monitor Vash, for liability reasons, of course. Expecting to find a ruthless bandit, they are instead surprised when they discover a rather friendly, and at times even cowardly man who simply wants to live a quiet life and refuses to kill, even though killing would probably be the most efficient means to solve his problems, and trouble always seems to be following him. While Meryl initially doubts this man is Vash, Millie seems sold on the idea from the start, and Meryl eventually comes to accept it after seeing enough of his legendary gun skills at work, and both of them continue to follow the humanoid typhoon as he drifts across the planet, seemingly aimless. Along the way, they meet Nicholas D. Wolfwood, a traveling priest who, while very different from Vash ideologically, is still a very friendly man and talented shot. This sets up the main cast for the series, which from episode 12 starts to be involved in a more intense plot. As in this episode, Vash meets Legato Blue Summers, and the first of the Gung Ho Guns, a group of super assassins sent to kill Vash. Now, Vash seems to know why they're doing so, but this isn't shown to the viewer initially, although Vash does resolve to solve the issue, although still to make sure he doesn't kill in the process. Even though he doesn't kill though, Vash must still witness as those after him kill innocents and test his pacifist ideals to the breaking point. By episode 16, Vash is pushed to the point where he accidentally destroys a city, and this causes a moral crisis for him, even if he still has not killed anyone. In episode 17, we have a flashback and it reveals that Vash is actually a sentient piece of lost and advanced technology known as a plant, these things. And his great power, it has great destructive capabilities as well. It is in this flashback episode that we also see that his pacifistic ideals and way of life, his quest for love and peace, were imprinted upon him by a very idealistic member of the crew known as Rem. This pacifism, however, was not imprinted on Vash's brother Knives, who sabotages the colony ship and causes them all to land on the planet Gunsmoke, a planet not very suitable to life. Cutting back to modern times, Wolfwood tracks down Vash in the midst of a moral crisis, and the two resolve to put an end to all this trouble. They work together, continuing to fight the remaining Gun Ho Guns, and even reunite with Meryl and Millie, who, for a time, were pulled off Vash's case by the Insurance Society. They continue to adventure together and fight Gung Ho Guns until Wolfwood is secretly revealed to be a gung-ho gun himself, though he eventually decides to defect and fight alongside Vash, although this is cut short when he's killed by his ex-mentor. In his death throes, Wolfwood has an emotional confession scene and tells Vash where to find Nye. From here, Vash heads out, but has one more moral break as Legato Blue Summers finally forces him to kill, mentally breaking him until Meryl recites some of Rem's words and ideologies, and this reawakens Vash's humanity and compassion and desire to simply live out a quiet and peaceful life, hunting peace and spreading love. The series concludes as Vash finally finds Knives in episodes 26, and after incapacitating him, carries him back to town. It should be noted that he doesn't kill Knives though, in staying true to his ideals. He has decided to carry him back to town, to awaiting Meryl and Millie, true to Rem's final request of take care of Knives. While it isn't explicitly stated, it's implied that he's carrying Knives back to town, and that he will try to redeem him somehow. Now, having just finished Trigun, my emotional state is one of silence. I do not mean that in a negative sense, merely I need a little while to process everything. I don't really know how to describe it. On one hand, the series is beautiful in that it stays true to itself and its leanings through and through, even though that it's blatantly stated that it's not necessarily the most practical ideals that are expressed throughout the time. Instead, it sticks full-heartedly into the ideals of spreading love and peace, even if that's not necessarily the easiest or most practical path. Although, I do understand why some may find the ending a bit unsatisfying, and I'll get into that later. In this ending, however, Vash finally stops running. He decides to do what he finally must do, and he confronts Knives. As he confronts Knives with a new solution he has for dealing with him. You see, Vash used to think that the only two solutions for dealing with Knives were either to kill him or run away. Now, since he doesn't want to kill, he's obviously been running away, but that's caused the problem of Knives being left unchecked to cause untold damage to the world and the citizens of it. But now, Vash has found a third option, and this is the option of redemption. For this reason, he decides to disarm and wound Knives, to incapacitate him, but not to kill him. And then, he proceeds to carry Knives out of the garden, and presumably back to town in order to redeem him. It's probably the hope that getting to know a wider sample size of people and humanity will correct Knives' extremely anti-human views and get him to come to terms with everything. On a philosophical plane, idealizing the concepts of love, peace, and redemption, this is a masterful execution of a unique solution. Vash has redeemed himself for running away from his problems for so long without killing Knives, and Knives is hopefully dealt with and cured without actually being killed. If this option is to work, it is a masterful counter to the black and white of kill or be killed, and it is in line with all the themes of moving forward and of love and peace which the series predicates itself on. This outcome is one in line with all of the show's main themes and lines up well with all of them. Vash stops running away, he uses force, but only necessary force, and makes sure to exercise enough this time, to exercise enough that Knives doesn't get away. He does not kill, and Vash forgives Knives, and indeed himself. You see, this series is big on forgiveness and redemption, and one of its themes is Vash forgiving himself, in addition to being forgiven by others. Now, this does bring up a few issues which some viewers might have with the series finale, though, and I don't think it would be justified if I just glossed over those. I think, we should give a second or two to talk about those. We did in the Big O series, after all. And the main issue with the series finale is that, practically speaking, some viewers may not be able to get over the fact that Knives has single-handedly killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and kind of all marooned them on Gunsmoke, a planet that, in all honesty, isn't very fit for life, and Vash kind of just, forgives him and seeks to reform him. Now, while this is noble, some might see this as crossing a line from being forgiving to being naive. Where this line lies, of course, depends on personal taste, and I do not personally have any issue with the ending, but I do understand why some would have problems with it, and seeing it as a bit of an off-putting conclusion.
On the topic of the ending of Trigun, I would also like to say that it may seem to some a little incomplete, a little abrupt, as if it kind of came out of nowhere. And there's good reason for this. You see, the manga which Trigun is based off of actually wasn't finished until much after the series. For this reason, their endings are different, and for this reason the ending to this animated series might seem a little different. That's not to discredit either ending, that's just to explain why this one may seem a little rushed. Vash just forgiving Knives out of nowhere after an epiphany that took one episode. It may also seem a bit questionable, seeing as that there was no great character arc which would redeem Knives. There was no redemption arc where he, saw the error of his ways, and then Vash was like, you know what, we can work this out. It kind of just happened, and Vash just decided, yeah, I'm gonna redeem this guy. That's not to discredit his attempt to do so, or the noble effort to reform someone. It's simply to say that the ending does seem a bit rushed.
As noted earlier, I don't personally take issue with the ending, As it is implied, Vash is, will be with Knives at all times to make sure he doesn't do anything crazy. Although, seeing how abruptly the anime ends, and that none of this is, firmly stated, as far as I know, I do understand why someone may not think it's the best ending, or prefer the ending in the manga. On the topic of the manga ending, I would also like to take a second just to speak of that, where, in this ending, in this timeline, Vash fights Knives too, but their struggle is so great that it destroys the Ark, which they've been fighting on, and Knives actually ends up saving Vash, and turns into a tree to feed him with the last of his energy. This I feel is a more obvious example of redemption, though I digress. While most other series probably would have had Knives killed or somehow extremely painfully incapacitated permanently by Vash or maybe some other character, Trigun sticks to its guns and has Vash stick to his. He sticks to his ideals and he sticks to his quest for love and peace. As he carries away Knives, it is not his goal to kill him, but merely to redeem him. And really, it is an eye-opening revelation that perhaps anyone can receive redemption. And perhaps the quest for love and peace isn't so futile as it might seem on the surface. After all, it worked for Vash.
Regardless of how one feels about the ending of Trigun, however, I myself don't mind it, but I understand why some might mind it a bit. The show itself is a brilliant watch, and one I would actually recommend. While it was not as well remembered as Cowboy Bebop, it is seen as sort of a spiritual sibling to it, and I think that's for good reason. They both follow gunmen who go on their own quest of self-discovery, with a few quirky characters, and in the end they learn some harsh lessons. They face some tough fights, and not everyone makes it out alive. Spoilers. But it does stand on its own as well. Trigun is not Cowboy Bebop set on a western planet. It's its own unique thing, with its own unique characters, and it's very endearing. In fact, rewatching it, I think I actually liked it more than I did the first time I saw it. I remember it being good, but I did not remember how well written the characters were, and how much attachment between them it fostered it and the viewer. And I would actually say rewatching it, Trigun was better, and it does deserve to be remembered as a classic, on its own merits, not simply as dusty Cowboy Bebop, but as a key gem of 90s anime, and something which we should look into more, which I hope to here. It's a great example of a great obscure anime memory.